Hello, Kibitzers, players, and people who accidentally stumbled into my channel. Today we have a game between Jonathan Speelman and Garry Kasparov, displaying some, I would say, beautiful endgame techniques. I will have the full PGN in the description, so if you want to see the full game you can. I will start at move 31 because I really want to go into the end game, and we actually start in this middle game position because I think seeing the flow is quite good to see how this transforms. Kasparov has the black pieces, and in this position he moved his rook to c2. Note that he is up one healthy pawn, so to speak, and we go after the rook trade. The first thing that black does is to have a small little threat of moving the pawn one square further. Normally not a big of a problem, but here it would be a queen, so yeah, let's stop that. Speelman moves the white rook to c4, stopping the threat and attacking the knight. The knight moves and repositions itself, and the rook takes the pawn. Black wins the pawn on d5 and now has the plus pawn on e5. Rook c7, and after e4, attacking the knight, kicking the knight back to e1, knight to d4, rook attacks from behind. Black chooses to defend with the rook. Note, by the way, that if white would want to kick the rook with f4, that would simply fail because you can take with en passant, and the f3 square is attacked 3 times and only defended 2, so this is not pleasant for white at all. So white moves the knight to d3 instead, and after e takes we get bishop takes, which is interesting because white takes back with a threat of taking on f7 with check. Now if you make a silly little move just to see what happens, like let's say g5, then white can win the pawn with bishop takes f7 sorry, bishop takes f7 check. And now we have king f8, rook takes, king takes, rook takes, and it's actually white who is up a pawn, and technically this absolutely should be a draw, but if anyone plays for a plus, it will be white here. So Garry needs to do something about that, and his response is king f8, which is actually inviting white to take. The key difference is that white either needs to take with the rook, giving a check, or with the bishop, but then there's no check anymore. If we take with the rook, we have to check, but the rook has now abandoned the d file, and it's kind of a problem because after king to e8, there are too many problems happening on the board for white to solve. The rook is being tickled by the king. The bishop on d5 is attacked by the rook, and of course we have the threat of locking the pawn down to d1. The only way that white can prevent to stop all of this would be by bishop to b3, but then we have knight takes b3, and quite simple winning position. So rook takes is not an option. If now bishop takes, we get rook to e4, and that defends the knight, and simply said, the knight just blocks the rook from preventing the pawn to promote. Again, only way to stop this would be by sacrificing the bishop, and we have an easy win at the end. So it's not an option to take this pawn now anymore, and white decided to play bishop to c4. Now I really like this this move. Typical Kasparov, I would say. He would play d2, ignoring the threat on his knight and just moving his pawn 1 forward. After rook takes d4, rook to e1 check, king g2, d1 queen, rook takes, rook takes. We have now traded our plus pawn and the knight for the rook, and we are in an endgame of rook versus bishop, and this is where we actually want to start to show the technique that Kasparov used to finish this off. So white starts with h4, rook c1, bishop to d5, rook to c5, bishop to b3, and now king e7. After bishop a2, h6, rook to b3, we now get rook c7, and this is kind of a theme that you will see in the game. The rook moves to the 7th rank to defend the pawn on f7, and we'll get back to that later, but it's a very, very key point, as the f7 pawn is the base of the pawn chain for black. This frees, of course, the black king to roam. Bishop to a2, now king d6, the point of the rook move. King h3, king e5, king g4, rook to a7. As you can see, the rook can be active whilst also defending the f7 pawn, and the king, of course, cannot. So, logical choice. Bishop b3, rook to b7, again harassing the bishop and still defending the pawn. Bishop d1. And as you can see now, the bishop has left b3. It's not harassing the pawn at this particular moment. The rook can go to the second rank. It harasses the f2 pawn, and it still has control over the key square b3, where the white bishop would be attacking the f7 square. In the meanwhile, we have improved the position of our king and having it on e5 already. Now, white needs to handle this attack on the f pawn. So what can we do? Well, let's say if white would move the f pawn 2 up, f4 check. Always tempting to give check, right? Well, we have king e4, and this is actually a bit of a problem. The white king is not going anywhere up soon, as the black pawns have full control over everything in front. We have changed the base for our pawn chain to g3 now, which became weak and is becoming a target. And the black king is very central and very nice on e4, ready to harass us more. If white would continue with something like bishop to f3 check, we get king e3, bishop d5, attacking the f7 pawn, f5 check, king h3, and now king f2 is just devastating. The threats are, well, for example, rook to b1, to mention one, which is an instant mate threat, and if nothing else, we can go to g1, where we harass the new base of the pawn chain. Not something that white would want. So we go back to our options, and we move the pawn 1 forward. See what this does. Well, first of all, we now have 2 pawns that can be attacked at the base of the pawn chain, which is already not good in itself. And black here has to move rook to h2, which is very annoying. The king is not coming back to h3, since the black rook has control of that. And just like before, the black pawn's full control over the squares in front of the white king. The black king also has control over f4 at this moment, and the threat is very serious, f7, f5, which would be checkmate at this moment. And there really is not much that white can do against, at least not something that's good. If f4 check, we get king e4, renew the threat. Bishop f3 check is just shouting boo to the black king, and after king e3, there really is nothing good that white can do to prevent the checkmate. It will always cost a lot of material, and white will go checkmate a little bit later. So, having researched both pawn moves, yeah, I already clicked on it. So the correct move here is king to f3, going back with the king and giving up some space. King d4, bishop e2, now rook b3 check, forcing the king to commit either forward or downwards, and the white king logically decides to go to g2. King to c3, it's a very simple idea of just moving in to d2 and e1 to harass first the bishop and then later the pawn chain on f2. Bishop to f3 with an annoying fork threat. Rook to b5, stopping the threat. Bishop c6, white being annoying. Rook c5. Bishop to e8, being annoying again. And rook to c7, again defending the pawn. Now note that all the moves black made so far, we moved the rook to defend the pawn chain, we moved the king forward to improve the position of the king. All of them have been with the pieces just to improve the position and none with the pawn. And that is a thought process of Kasparov, clearly, because in this position you just want to keep all the counterplay away. And with the pawn chain on f7, f7 is easily defended and you cannot get the white bishop behind your pawns to harass them. So this is a very key point. If you can avoid moving your pawns, do so. And that is what Kasparov did here. So king f1. So white is threatening nothing, not harassing us at the moment. So that was the idea again. Oh yeah, move in our king. So king d2, bishop to a4, rook to c1, check. King g2, king to e1, harassing the pawn chain. Bishop to b3, being slightly annoying again. Rook to c7, and f4. I think the thought behind f4, although it opens up the king a lot and it gives us the weakness of c3 again, is that currently the black pawns are on white squares. Ideally, white would like to fixate them. f4 takes control as much as it can over g5 to strengthen the fixation of the black pawns and prevent a g6, g5 push. King e2, improving the position of its king again. Bishop to d5. And now king to e3. Very clear to, again, improve the position of its king, but also take control of the key square e4. Bishop to a8. And now f6. This is the first time that Kasparov moves the pawn since we went into the rook versus bishop ending. King g1. And rook to g7 to support a push on g5 now, which white can do nothing against because it's on a black square. And that is actually one of the key points that we saw in this ending as well. The white bishop can never do anything else than control the light squares. King g2, g5, the push, h takes, takes, and takes. It was in this position that Speelman resigned. So if you look at the position at the moment, the black pieces are very well coordinated. The pawn is safe on f6, so there is no threat from the white perspective, whilst the white pieces are not good at all and white can do not much. But let's play on to see what would have happened. So in this position, white needs to make a move. So let's say we move, well, we cannot move our pawn clearly because then we instantly lose it. So let's move our bishop. So after bishop b7, black has the threat f5, and this is now instantly very serious because we threaten to move f4, winning the pawn on g3. Now the only thing we can do against that is step out of the pin. And the only way to step out of the pin and keep the pawn is that we need to keep defending the pawn at only two squares, h3 and h2. So let's try king to h3, going towards the rook. Then we have simple king f2, and there is nothing that white can do to prevent losing the pawn and thus the game. So our other option would be king h2. After king h2, we have king to f2, threatening checkmate, which is again absolutely devastating in this position. Good luck solving this. And also, if nothing else, if it wouldn't be there, we still will win the pawn. So that's not an option. So let's go back to where we were. We were in this position. We don't want to move the bishop then. So what else we have? We don't move the bishop, we don't move the pawn, so the king is the only thing. And the only candidate move really is king h3, having gone through the previous positions. A difference between moving the bishop first and moving the king now is that these moves that I demonstrated, if you had the black pawn on f5, So let's just push the black pawn to f5. And now the threat is very real again. We want to move the king to f2 and then win the pawn on f3. So what to do against this? Well, king h4, then we just get rook to g4 check, and after king h3, king f2, and the pawn will fall. There is really not much else we can try here as white. So that brings us back to the position. Oh, sorry, that brings us back to the original position of the game, which was this one, and this is where Speelman resigned. So I hope you enjoyed this ending. I hope it was illustrative for you. If not, let me know what you'd like to see instead. If you did enjoy it, also let me know in the comments, and I'll be sure to show you more endgames from Kasparov or other great players. Have a great day, and thank you for watching. Bye bye.